food processors are great.
Gorgeous, baby. You're gorgeous.
This is the Josh Podcast Show, the anti-podcast podcast on God and man. The show that everybody's talking about. The show that will become a necessary part of your weekly mental diet. The show that picks up where JoshRolfe.com leaves off. The show title that uses the word podcast 4 times. Introducing your host, Josh Rolfe.
I love life. I love it. Sometimes I'll say life can be absolute hell. But today, for me, it's going pretty well. I hope it's going pretty well for you today. If it is a hellish day, you probably don't want to listen to this podcast right now. If you're having a decent day, you probably want to hear something that starts out saying food processors are great. Because they are great. When life is going well, even a food processor is great. What is a food processor? Is it a mixer? It's a mix. I think it's a mixer. Food processors are great comes from a song called Advert, about advertising, from a Brit pop band called Blur that I really liked in the early 90s, my coming of age time. The purpose of this podcast today is to share with you, that's right, you, the listener, some of that love for life and hopefully, I'm having a hard time tonight. Hopefully, you smile a little while listening. Hopefully, you feel good feelings while listening. We're at episode 55 now, which means now I have many hours of material under my belt on this podcast, and I would wager that with all the hours of material on this podcast, you have not listened to every single episode. And even if you have listened to every episode, there may be one you want to go back to. So this is the infomercial episode. But before I do the infomercial, I would encourage you to subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher or however you listen to podcasts, and then rank and review the podcast on iTunes if you use iTunes. Ranking and reviewing the podcast on whichever medium you are listening to the podcast on, including my website. If you're listening to it through my website, then I would encourage you to make a comment, to drop me a line, drop me a note. Tell me how it's going. Tell me if you enjoyed it. Tell me if you hated it. I would love to get some feedback about this. I have 24 rankings, 24 people have given my podcast a review. And I listen to podcasts that don't have 24. So 24, I'm not going to complain about. But I did get those 24 in the first year of the podcast. And in the last year, I haven't, even though I have more listeners than I did the first year, I don't have the rankings and reviewings like I had in the first year. So the reason I say that is if you do that, if you decide, I know it's a decision process for you, to rank and review the podcast, that is the absolute kindest and most generous thing you could do for the show. But only if you give it 5 stars. If you listen to the early episodes where I asked for a 1-star review, I want you to try really hard and ignore that. And I don't want a 4-star review or a 3 or a 2 or a 1, because the 5 stars is very important in iTunes land. You've got to give it a 5-star review because that helps the show. So I would hope that you can do that, and I would appreciate it. I appreciate you even listening right now. I mean, this is very kind of you to do. So thank you. I'm glad you're listening. It's wonderful. It's a beautiful thing, and it's why I love life. I love life. Another thing you can do is to sign up for a monthly email at joshrolf.com for 2 years. So the blog's been around for going on 3 years in November. For 2 of those years, the first 2 years, I kicked out a ton of blog posts. I haven't done any blog posts this year, like not one. I've started maybe a dozen, but I have not done a single blog post, I don't think, this year. But they're going to kick up again soon. I'm going to pick up where I left off. I think I did, the last one was on Black Friday. Go to the blog, joshrolf.com, or if you can't spell Rolf, joshblogblog.com. That's blog twice, joshblogblog.com. And there, if you scroll to the bottom of the page, you can see a pop-up that'll ask you if you want to subscribe to a monthly email where you'll be notified of any posts that I write. If you've signed up and you haven't received an email from me this year, it's because I haven't done any blog posts. If you want to know when the podcasts come out, you subscribe on iTunes or subscribe in another way. I'm not going to advertise to my email list the new podcast episodes that I do. It's just a decision that I made. With that said, I want to take some time in this episode to go back through the last 55 episodes that you may want to check out. As I said not too long ago, I'm shooting for evergreen content that will not go stale for a long, long time. So if you go back 2 years, it's not going to be out of date. It's not going to be about the issue du jour back then. It's going to be something that is still relevant, okay? Hopefully, it makes you smile. Hopefully, it makes you laugh. Hopefully, this podcast can generate some kind of life improvement. Now, there's a lot of podcasts out there that do the self-improvement, self-help, that genre. And while I do have plans of doing some self-help episodes that are possibly in the mocking self-help podcasts zone. So now I'm going to go through the old episodes, and that would require me, I'm not prepared for that. So I've got to type in the name of my show online and go back through to the very beginning. The very first podcast was how to start a podcast. It was only 27 seconds long, which was the shortest at the time. I didn't know it. It was the shortest podcast that had ever been recorded. I would encourage you to listen because that will tell you almost everything you need to know about this podcast by listening to that first 27 seconds. If you want more explained about the show, what it's about, what I'm trying to do here, then listen to episode number 2. Episode number 2 is pretty much still right on about why this show exists. It's called Letting It Out. And I'm talking about my voice here, letting out my voice, talking, okay, when I say letting it out. The next 4 episodes, I interviewed my father, who is perhaps the brightest man that I know. He is one of those rare birds who has a photographic memory, literally sleeps 3 to 4 hours a night, and hasn't slept a full night's sleep because I think his brain is on fire. He is constantly thinking. He has a notebook next to his bed, and he is always writing in it, taking notes, trying to remember things. He collects files that became so heavy on the top floor of our house that I grew up in, that they're still in, that he had to get a storage unit so that the floor didn't cave in because there are so many files. And if you listen to those 4 episodes, you'll get a sense of what I mean. He is very bright, and he talks in those 4 episodes about ghosts. Episode 7, I interviewed my Jewish friend, Maury Litwack, who is one of the funniest people on the planet. I love that guy, and he is going to be appearing on the show in the future, okay? So be aware of that. If you like that episode and you want to hear someone just attack me and go after me and berate me, belittle me the entire episode and hear me laugh through the entire thing, then you might want to check out that episode. Episode number 8 was with another genius in my life, a coworker whose name is Murray. And Murray is a trivia genius. Murray was on episode 8, and I've been talking to him about coming back on the show for the last 2 years. It was November 19th that was recorded. Wow. He had an idea of interviewing me, of asking me questions. I don't like that idea. Maybe that's why I haven't interviewed him, because I just want to interview him. I don't want him to interview me. So we're still working that out. Episode number 9 is one of my top listened to episodes of this podcast. It was called Ugly Christmas Sweaters, or Ugly Christmas Sweater Parties and the Fall of the Roman Empire. And it's funny that I just botched up Ugly Christmas Sweaters, the title, which it doesn't say Ugly Christmas Sweaters. It says Ugly Christmas Sweater in the singular, because in the episode itself, I think I botch up the title many times, but it's about the trend of wearing having ugly Christmas sweater parties around Christmas time. Episode 10, I have no idea what that was, but then I spent a lot of time talking about my 1-star reviews, and I had received my first 1-star review in episode 11. And then episode 12, I had that person on the show who gave me the 1-star review, someone I had just met through this podcast. So that was a very exciting time for me. And she still listens. She pops up every now and then and will write, and she's a really fun person. And if you want to hear a glimpse of her, then go back to episode 12. Episode 13, I had done what I had promised earlier, which was that I was going to do things and try things that were new and different. Things that you would not expect if you're a heavy podcast listener. And episode 13 is that episode because it's the one that is less than 1 second long. Again, setting the world record. The 2-time world record holder for podcasting shortest episodes goes to Josh Rolfe. In the first episode at 27 seconds, and episode 13, where I say the funniest word in all of English language. And that one, the description of it, I think is kind of funny because it tells a story about the person listening to that podcast, why you should listen to it if you're a busy, successful person. And then I started after that. I think after that was when I started reading old blog posts, which was the original intent of this podcast. I wanted to go back, and I was a little scared to do that, I guess, because it took me about 5 or 6 months before I read my first blog post. So if you're too lazy to read, or you don't like to read blogs, then, and I wouldn't call my blog a blog, it's more like articles or essays or thoughtful writings on God or mankind, humankind. And I started that with episode 15 called How to Fall Asleep. Followed up with that on talking about the Apple Watch and the calculator watch and my fascination with calculator watches. And I haven't worn one in a while, but I need to because I love the calculator watch. And I think I'll stop there. Although, no, I'll focus on a few more. I did some interviews. I interviewed Matt Lewis, a political writer, before he authored a book. So there's evergreen content that is not so evergreen. Although his book is out now and it's done pretty well, and it just went to paperback, which is pretty amazing since it's only been out for a few months, 6 months or so. This is a great podcast, episode 21. I then interview a farmer who is going through a drought in California. This was last year, and that drought is ongoing. And I have also talked to him about coming back on the show to give an update. So that might happen in the future. I'd love for that to happen. Then I said I'd do this. And does this sound like I'm just totally into myself? Because I don't mean for it to be. I'm giving an infomercial of this podcast. I started doing podcasts on the days leading to my 40th birthday. And that one, I think, was a dud because I got sidetracked and busy, and I only did 2 episodes leading up to my 40th birthday. I did one on why you hear the gorgeous baby intro at the beginning of each episode, and you hear some failed attempts when I was soliciting gorgeous baby voiceovers, and some were absolutely horrendous, and I included those in that episode, number 27. I then talked about the man with no sense of humor, who is a character I am working on a new blog post for, so stay tuned for that one. Then started reading old blog posts again, why I drove with my brights on for 9 years. Some more thoughtful posts that I've done on how motherhood is like calculus, which is episode 18. And When Christmas Ends, episode 30. One I'm particularly proud of because it talks about Christmas in ancient times, even pre-Christ times. And then one of the ones that I'm absolutely totally in love with is the Thank You Note Loop series. I've done 3 of those so far. I hope that the Thank You Note series will continue forever. And that one is guest hosted by Tracy Sellers, who is a TV show host and also just an amazingly funny, hilarious person. So I encourage you to listen to that. All my life, I wanted to be a flight attendant, another blog post reading, lists, another blog post reading, and then God Part 1, where I go back to my early days in Kentucky and Pennsylvania and about a traumatic move and a time when I was friendless and had an experience with the divine at a young age, and I share that in episode 35. Nothing, extraordinary in that experience, but enough to make an impression on the young Josh Rolfe. Episode 36, yogurt. You got to listen to the episode about yogurt. And then episode 37, I bring out the man in men. Another episode that I would highly recommend. I read blog posts, The Forgotten Password, How to Sit, Our Corner of the Eye Problem, and then I broke from the blog reading to whisper in a hotel room, and I go into great detail about why I whisper when I'm in hotel rooms, especially while I'm recording a podcast and I'm with a group that may be sharing an adjoining wall or ceiling or floor in the hotel, and over here that I'm recording a podcast, which is why I whispered it. Episode 42. How to reach me, episodes 44 through 46, are some of my favorite personal writings. I think I've gotten a lot of listens on this one and hits on the original blog post. It was one long blog post, one of my longest. It was like 2,500 words or 3,500 words, something like that. 3,500, I think. And it's all of the ways to reach someone today. So I write about how to reach me because I'm most familiar with that. And there are many rules that go along with reaching someone these days. And so that is a 3-part series. And then episode 47, I handed the mic over to my 2 sons, twin boys, 9-year-olds, who did their own rendition of the opening and closing tracks of the podcast, which, by the way, the actual music is done by The Shore, a great band, and I hope still to have the lead singer and founder of the band on the podcast. Check out their music. They're on iTunes. They're on Spotify. They're all over the place. The Shore. And you have to search for like The Shore Music or The Shore Band to find the right one. I interviewed Captain Corey Scow, who is a pilot and a vlogger, and I have a long-time fascination with flight and anything aviatory, and so that's why I interview Corey. Aha, ba-bump, rhyme. Time, Body, and Mercy. I get a little serious. Episode 50. Episode 51, I read a future blog post, one I have not yet published. I think that was a dud because I realized I should probably read things that I've already published because they're good. They're solid. They're things I can fall back on with confidence. The last few episodes, episode 52 is on pizzazz. I give a pizzazz challenge, and I just talked to my youngest brother today who said that he commented on the pizzazz episode somewhere. He thought it was on Stitcher. I haven't seen it. So he actually took the pizzazz challenge, and I'm thrilled with that because I haven't heard from anyone else. So if you took the pizzazz challenge or are curious about what that might be, episode 52 is the place to be. Ooh, I keep rhyming. Or did I rhyme with the word be both times? That's still a rhyme. Episode 53, what is the funniest word? I talk about the funniest word in human language, which is also said in episode 13. I probably should have recorded what is the funniest word blog post reading closer to the time I did episode 13. But, I got excited for 2 years and felt like recording a lot of other stuff instead, which is what you can do when you own your own podcast. And then last week's episode was on the black comedian who performed at the Apollo, who was actually white and who wasn't a comedian and who really likes long episode titles. That is formerly a blog post where I go into why I do this and why I like comedy, where it started, which I kind of start in the middle. I don't really start early on because the comedy happened long before where I start this story. But I go all the way up till 2 years ago, which I say on the podcast was last night, but it actually wasn't. That was the time, what I said when I wrote the blog post. But it was 2 years ago when I saw my first amateur stand-up act, an improv group, and then turned into a burlesque show. My wife and I left because we don't do that sort of thing. And so, because we're very prudent people, apparently. And I go into why I like and value clean comedy. And that takes us up to today, the infomercial episode that is about infomercial length. And on infomercials, they talk about the same thing over and over. They can talk about a little skillet for 26 minutes, and it's incredible. I have talked about the Josh podcast show, which is much more than a skillet, which is why, if you could be so kind, give me a review, give me a ranking on iTunes. It's kind of tricky to figure out, but once you do it, man, I will be even more happy. I will love life even more. You will send me to the clouds. I would appreciate it. You're the best. Thank you for being here. Thanks for listening. Keep doing what you're doing. Have the best day of your life. I hope today is the day that you conquer your dreams.
Thank you for
do
listening
whatever
to
you
the
want,
Josh
have
Podcast
fun,
Podcast
be
Show,
good,
the
remember who you
anti-podcast
are.
podcast on God and man. For more information, visit joshpodcast.com. Follow Josh on Twitter at Josh Rolfe. That's Rolfe, R-O-L-P as in podcast, H. Now go and have the best day and night ever. And have fun.